Hello? Yeah?
I think, honestly, it'll be through the speakers anyway. All right. Summer Open final.
I'm going to start this debate by giving you a TLDR of this book called Malleus Maleficarian, which is the bestseller in medieval century in the year of 1438. That's a Latin name, but the actual English name is called Hammers of the Witches. What it tells is about the profound knowledge of how to kill witches. That was the bestseller in that period of time, that everybody has knowledge of it. That's literally the official textbook of the knowledge of witchcraft. What is included in the book? First of all, historical knowledge and how the trial process works in order to prosecute the witches. That's a bestseller of prosecuting the witches. Second of all, it talks about how the witches are dealing, what exactly are included in witchcraft. That is to say, oftentimes what is happening is that the person who are doing witchcraft will do a deal with the devil in order to gain some unnatural powers in order to curse on other people. That deal specifically to say you can sacrifice other villagers by killing them and giving the crops to the devil, or you can have sex with the devil. That is to say, what this piece of characterization and what my intro does to this debate is that this is the official knowledge and this is the accurate information that the actor has access to at that period of time. That is to say, when you're knowing that your neighbor is fucking a devil in the backyard of their garden, you know your neighbor is probably killing someone in order to sacrifice the devil to gain some unnatural powers in order to impose some conditions and some harms on your neighbor. We, as the affirmative, is so proud to say that, well, definitely you should yap about it and snitch your neighbors. I'm going to do three things in my speech. Firstly, I will talk about why you have an obligation to do so and you don't want to go to hell. Second of all, I will talk about why this maximizes your personal safety by using an analogy as cultural revolution. Finally, I will talk about why you will be emotionally terrified if you don't report to do so. Firstly, starting out with an obligation. It is important to understand that in that period of time, this individual, even though he knows some good things of which we're probably doing, but overall, he still has this irreversible fear of God. That is to say, because of the limited access of scientific development, limited access of literacy, limited access of education. So their information accessibility predominantly come from churches and come from religious communities. That is to say, they have huge exposure to Christian or like Orthodox community every day, so it is very unlikely that this individual will shift their belief or change what they're thinking because this is deeply rooted in their society, deeply rooted in his family and community. Second of all, it is intuitive that the actor really doesn't want to go to hell because hell is visually described within every day of your life as, oh, this is something that is miserable, this is something that is very shameful, you will suffer irreversibly in the hell, and also on a counterfactual, you might really want to go to the heaven, and currently in the status quo, you probably are not a good person, you're not good enough for it. So obviously you have the incentive to do something very heroic to move to God and try to push yourself to the heaven. That actor incentive analysis will further tell you that why this individual have the incentive to report to avoid going to hell and also simultaneously make themselves raise themselves up, have a personal glow up to go to the hell. No, sorry, to go to the heaven. Okay, what is the impact of this? A, not doing this means that you feel like you're being condemned by God every day. When you look at the sky, you feel like the God hates you, he's gonna cry. Second of all, you feel like your soul is being contaminated every day. Third of all, when you're walking on the street, you no longer have the confidence to believe that you're a righteous individual. You no longer have the personal belief and the confidence when you are going to churches and religious communities, when you're hanging out with your friends, you feel like you're a hypocrite because you didn't report at the very beginning. You feel like you're already contaminated, you're already in the hell. However, you're still trying to hang out with your uncontaminated friends. Second of all, personal safety. I want to use the analogy here as cultural revolution. What happens is that, similar to what happened in China in cultural revolution, is that there is a significant amount of people being prosecuted with, being accused of being witches, including both men and women. That is to say, oftentimes people just throw a bunch of people into the trials altogether, historically speaking, and it's like they don't care about whether or not you're not, and you have the burden of proof to prove that you're innocent in order to avoid being hanged as being accused of witches. That is to say, if people find out that you're not reporting, which is very likely to happen because she has other neighbors, and other neighbors probably are more rational than you do, and also she's probably just not very good at hiding things. But the risk is that as long as people find out that you are not report, that is to say, they were going to directly report you as well to the criminal trust because they want to fill in the quota. And also simultaneously, if they fill in the quota of how many witches they're prosecuting each month, they themselves don't have to be prosecuted anymore. So that is to say, people have the incentive to actively report you, even though they know you are not the person doing witchcraft. But people will interrogate you, people will feel skeptical, people will question about, why are you not reporting this? Obviously, you're an ally. Hashtag bad. Okay, second of all, I think it's just like if you're active in prosecution when the trial is happening, you're the witness, you're the lawyer on the side of the prosecution instead of on the side of the defendant. Obviously, you have so much risk, and obviously you have so much social status, because being active in the prosecution, like, definitely and very explicitly show your stance that you're against witchcraft. That is to say, you minimize your possibility of being innocently prosecuted. Third of all, I think the move is very heroic because all the social community and narrative currently right now are proposing the prosecution of the witches. That is to say, first of all, you increase your social status in the town. Second of all, because the moment you start snitching around and the moment you're making a move, obviously you catch so many attention and so many capitals from the town. That is to say, previously you are nobody. So if you're prosecuted, if you're being hanged, or people are skeptical about you, nobody really cares. But right now, you are a hero. You're a superhero of the town. You save the village. And when you are making a move or when you're saying something, obviously you'll feel more respected and you have more social capital. What is the impact of this? First of all, obviously you keep yourself from being hanged. And second of all, you're also better to protect your families. If your families are being prosecuted, or your families are being blamed of being witches, right now you're a person with higher social capital and higher reputation in the town. So if there is like wishy-washy gossip yapping and people are like, hey, like your mom is probably an evil witch, obviously you have the social capital and moral high ground to say, hey, shut up. I've already prosecuted witch like a long time ago. I observed this witch behavior and I heroically reported it. Obviously, this sense of moral high ground and sense of narrative won't exist on side negative. Finally, I will talk about emotional effect if you do not report them. First of all, the context here you need to understand in Middle Age century is that people live in very intense communities and they have very limited and frequent communications. Like, they probably just hang out with like 40 people throughout their entire life, and it's always the fixed amount of group. That is to say, those people have developed the habit of, oh, this Thursday I'm just going to go to the pub and yap with my friends. And also, Udai told me a mechanism is that during that period of time, people do not drink water because water sometimes is contaminated. Sometimes they just drink a lot of beer. That is to say, right now, you could not drink beer anymore because you know drunk people say sober words. Drunk people are honest, and you have a huge secret to keep. That is to say, you decrease the utility and the entertainment of being intoxicated. You cannot easily hang out with your friends, have a hookup, etc. You cannot feel so comfortable going to the pub anymore. I think that's a devastating harm because this is probably the only social entertainment and social utility that this person is able to have. And second of all, I think it just becomes more awkward social interaction. For example, when I have a big secret to hide, it's like, oh, who has a crush on someone else? Like, if I couldn't tell it to anyone else, it feels fucking suck. And I will have such an urge to interact socially awkwardly because I don't know if I'm going to sleep my mouth. I don't know if I'm going to leak this big secret. And this time, leaking the big secret is a big thing. That is to say, you're just probably not going to hang out with friends anymore because you cannot trust yourself. You know you're a gossip girl. You know you can't resist your human nature. And I think that's the reason why, overall, the social interactions of this person will significantly decrease. You probably lose your friends because you cannot no longer yap with them. Second of all, I also couldn't tell you close relatives. That is to say, throughout the entire time, your partner is hanging out with you, you always feel like you're hiding something to them, and you cannot openly talk about this to them. And that is to say, you feel like you're not giving closure to your partner, you feel like you're betraying them because you're sharing a big secret from them. So I think the third reason is that right now you feel guilty because you kind of know the knowledge that if bad things happen, it might be because of witchcraft. So, for example, today, there's an accident car crash. Oh, they don't have cars. Horse crash, or there's an accident person mysteriously being murdered, you will self-blame yourself, and I think self-blame is also quite horrible. So, proud to propose.
All right, I'd like to thank the speaker for her remarks, and I'd like to invite the first speaker for the opposition to open up the op case and address not exceeding 8 minutes, 15 seconds. Grace, you're here.
If you think the legal system favors the rich and powerful now, well, goddamn, it was way worse back in Salem. We say that if you accuse the farmer who has the best crops every year, the most money, probably the guy who's the doctor because he can heal your friends, you are going to lose because he is the top dog in town and you're just an average nobody. This is a really bad idea. The first thing I'm going to do is give some setup. What do we think your interests are? And then I'll discuss 1, why we don't think God will be particularly annoyed at you. 2, why we think this will create an accusation chain that's going to leave you the loser. And 3, why we think the devil is going to be against you if you accuse their number 1 soldier. And that's going to be pretty bad for you. Setup. What do we think you look like? Obvious claims here. You are an average person. You are not particularly wealthy. You are not particularly privileged in this location. You do not have a large amount of wealth. That is the that is what this, there's nothing in the info slide that suggests you have any clout. The second thing, maybe you are a woman, 50% chance. Maybe you are not a woman, but you probably have female family members that are presumably a woman. What do we think the witch looks like? The first thing is that maybe they do sleep with the devil. It's unclear in the info slide. But the second thing is, as per the info slide, the only magic that they have is slightly beneficial things. Like, for example, being able to grow a crop or tell the weather. They are not able to come at you with any particular power. So it's unclear whether or not if they came at you, they'd be able to overpower you. So you might be able to lock your doors when you sleep, but if they tried to stab you in the street, you might just be able to fight and win. Unclear they have the power to kill... unclear they have the power to kill you. Okay, what are your interests? Obviously, we'd say as you're a God-fearing individual, you want to stay in God's good graces. But we'd also say you'd want to help your family and make sure that your reputation in the community is upheld, so people do not continuously think you're a witch or a snitch or something particularly bad. But 3, you also just care about the material conditions of your life. You don't want to die. You do not want to be accused of being a witch. And the final thing I want to point out in setup is, as per the info slide, you do not have any substantial evidence. You have seen them do some magic, but cameras do not exist. You cannot have a photograph. You cannot prove to anyone definitively that this person did it. All it is your word of mouth, as you cannot accrue any evidence back in Salem. Why will God not be particularly angry with you? The first thing we tell you is, God is forgiving. And if you do something wrong and repent, you'll be fine. And you believe that because you're in Salem. Also, God will understand, as I'm going to go to at length in a second, there will be a lot of contrasting information you have in your mind. God will understand this is a particularly hard decision and one that is not easily made on the whim of your hands. And it's one that he's not going to be particularly angry with you if you get wrong, because you understand that God does not accuse you of, does not put you in hell just for making one sin. So you understand, even if you make the wrong call now, God will be okay with you later. The second thing is you only see them doing positive things. You see them growing the crops. You see them healing people. And these are tools of the gods. They are not tools of the devil. The devil does things like give people grievous diseases and makes people die and destroys the crops. So it's unclear to you whether or not this person is actually sent by God or is sent by the devil. You do not know that inherently because you only see them do positive things. So there will always be a calculus in the back of your head. Maybe this is not a witch, but it's some other godly thing that God has sent you. You do not know and you cannot be certain. And God is aware you cannot be certain because he is omnipotent and knows everything. But the third thing is God tells you to forgive others, and you should forgive the people who have committed the sins, which is in this case the other witch. So if you actually read the Bible says not to accuse people and put people to death for their sins. It is to forgive them. So you should forgive this individual. Okay, 1, why is accusing the witch really bad for you? Premise 1, the witch will know it was you that accused them. And this is for a couple of reasons. 1, trials require evidence, and the only evidence is you as a witness. So if there is a trial, the only way it goes to trial is if you get up on stage and say, they are a witch. So the witch will obviously be aware because you are the star witness. But secondly, the village won't believe you if you don't say it publicly, because back in this time, people think if you believe something, you should say it loudly so everyone is sure of it. So it doesn't look shady. It doesn't look like you're hiding something, or you're accusing them that you're not willing to put your entire body behind. Which is just to say, if you accuse them silently, no one will take you seriously because you did not care enough to go publicly. But thirdly, gossip is big. And there's nothing to do in Salem other than gossip. Annika wants to mention this, but there's no TV. It's pretty boring. People like a good story. So it means that if you have to tell the top guy, and the top guy's probably going to tell his wife, who'll tell her friends, and then everyone knows, because it's a small town in Salem. So they'll find out. Premise 2, they'll accuse you back. And this is pretty simple. 1, they are self-serving. And this is the key explanation as if you are not the devil, or if you are not a witch, why someone else would accuse you of being a witch. Because when you say, they only accuse me because they're trying to take blame away from themselves, and they are in fact the witch, and you should put them to death, it looks good for them because it explains why you'd be accused. But secondly, it delegitimizes them, because if they are the devil, and they are accusing you of being the devil, well, obviously it looks a bit bad for them, because like they'll believe they'll be influenced by the devil, and it delegitimizes their claims. Why is that bad? One, you don't have evidence. At the very least, it's a 50-50 chance whether or not they win or you win, which is pretty bad for you. And if you buy their claims that you have to prove that you are actually innocent, it's really hard for you to prove you're innocent because proof does not exist, which means you're going to lose as well, and it's a race to the bottom, and you don't want to participate in a race to the bottom. And notably, the second thing is to explain that they are likely to have social clout, and you are not. And this is what I alluded to in my introduction. This person is likely the town doctor, because they can heal people. This person likely has enough money, has a lot of money, because they have the access to the best crops that they're able to sell to local villages every year, because they can grow a bit faster or predict the weather so they know when to plant it, which means they have more money than you. It means the town is probably reliant on them for food, because they are the one that provides the largest amount of it every year, which means they have clout and you do not. So if it is the village that has to pick between which one they like more, they probably think the one who has been blessed by God for the last 20 years to have the blessed crops and to be the richest one is likely to be the one that is actually telling the truth, when you're a piss random in Salem who does not have this sort of clout. So obviously they side with them. And also, this explains why they have the capacity to prove in the court of law why they are innocent, because they can point to the fact that God has blessed them when God has not blessed you, which means if there's no evidence available, they will win the case, but you will not. And note, even if they accuse you, or not just you, they might accuse your family, and you are particularly scared because that will always hang over you. But even if you win, it's still bad for you, because the witch will target you and try and kill you in between the time that they're put to death. And maybe they're able to do that, and that's pretty scary. But if they're the witch, they'll try, and you might die. But secondly, it does just create an ever-present sense of doubt, because people are always on edge. They'll think maybe they were wrong where they put them to death and not you. So the next time you do something slightly sketchy in town, the first thing will be for someone else to accuse you of a witch, because maybe the last time you were accused was actually true. So for the rest of your life, people will think maybe you're a witch, and that's going to really fuck you up. But also, we would just suggest at the end of this, calling them out is a risk inherently, whereas not saying anything is no risk at all, because there's no reason for the witch to come at you elsewise. But finally, even if you win handedly, it's still bad for you, because we would suggest you will feel like the devil may be against you because you have accused their number one soldier. You've sabotaged his operation. You've made sure that the person that he wanted to do all of his dirty work in the village is no longer able to do that because you put to death. Why is it bad? What are the impacts? 1, the devil curses your crops. B, the devil might tempt you to replace you as the witch, because there needs to be one witch in the town, and now you've killed the first one, so you become the witch when he tempts you with his demon abilities. But 3, the devil might just make you sick and kill you. At the end of this debate, we are the side that does not stand by risk. They are. Thank you.
This team loses when they rely on a very modern interpretation of religion. Because yeah, we know now that you might be forgiven, but at that time, every action of yours was informed by religion. There was no education, you were not like a scholar, there was no awareness about what this may look like. So you did believe that not snitching was slighting God, was siding with the devil. It was condemning your town to hell, and more importantly, it was condemning yourself to the depths of the fiery pits that you yourself were told for your very whole life that you should avoid. And it was condemning your entire town and the people you knew to the worst kinds of fate. And that is where we take it up on Affirmative. Because the lack of responsiveness to our material on why this is just so bad for you as an individual, and why you feel a constant sense of guilt, a constant sense of fear around your town, is just what dooms this negative team. 3 things in the speech. First, on God. Second, on accusation chains. And third, on the devil. First, on God. They first claim that Their first claim at Ollie is just that this is forgiving and you can like repent, but you don't forgive witches or the devils, you forgive people. And when you have seen this person do the witchcraft, you do not view them as a person. It did not matter whether they were just making crops or doing small things. You believe that anyone with the powers of a witch was a bad person. It was a soldier of the devil. And they themselves concede that towards the end of their speech. If you did believe that this was the number one soldier of the devil for some reason, then why on earth would you forgive it out of this debate? Secondly, Ollie tries to suggest that this is not the devil because they do good things, and therefore you would distinguish that and you might even associate it with God. Firstly, it is unclear that these people have these sorts of distinction. This was the same God that had things like the Inquisition, things like wars that this person had seen and had seen the fallout of. So it is just unclear why people make these distinctions. But secondly, it just does not matter. Sometimes, like you were told that witches did things like heal, but you were told that the power that they used to heal you was derived from the devil, was derived from Satan, or was derived from sources of evil. So even if they did heal you directly, you thought that that healing was bad. You thought that it was undeserved. You thought it was unearned, because the way that you were healed was by dark forces. It was by forces of evil. Even if they solved every problem that the town had, you did not like it because it was solved by evil. It was solved by the devil. You thought the town didn't deserve to be solved. That was just a harm. But thirdly, like, it is just unclear what this team is getting at. Because on one hand, you can't be certain that they're a witch, but you can be certain that they can do good. Like, what are you certain about? I would say that you are certain about the religion that you have been told from a very young age. You're certain that the devil is bad. You're certain that witches are bad. And therefore, you are certain that if you do not tell someone that this person is a witch, you are going to be in a bad position. The last thing they say under here is that the God might bless you, but I don't know, Joan of Arc got burned. I don't think you believe in blessings. At the end of this issue, you ought buy that God is not on your side if you do not snitch. That is the largest harm in this debate, as we lay out at first, because you were a devout God follower, or whatever it said in the info slide, and this was just particularly bad for you. Second, let's talk about the accusation chain. Ollie suggests that they can accuse you back because they can't collect evidence. The first claim I'd like to know is, like, you just don't know who accused you until the trial, until you're up on trial, so it is just too late to accuse someone back. Like, what are you gonna do? You're, like, up there, everyone's like, burn, 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 hang, hang, hang. You're like, maybe they were a witch. Like, what? Come on, guys. Secondly, even if they were going to accuse you, you had a first mover advantage because you were the one who accused this person first, right? It is just unclear why them accusing you back is a more reasonable response. But thirdly, you can collect evidence. You know what they do. You know where they live. You can get villagers to go around their house and find things. Like, sure, there aren't cameras, but there are still people with hands and legs. There are people who are willing to rally behind you to beat the devil. And yeah, you could beat the devil. You could collect evidence. Fourthly, once you report it to the clergy themselves investigate. So you can get evidence, and they're not going to accuse you back. They say that it might be unsettling, but just be comparative here. Scroll up in your notes for Annika's speech where she tells you why it is so bad around your social circles. You are unsettled around every single person that you're around your family, around your friends. So if there was a form of unsettlement that happened in this debate, it was far worse when it was around your family, around the people that you valued the most. You ought weigh that particularly highly. First, because these interactions were far more commonplace. You were in a tight-knit and insular community, and these interactions were ones that happened every single day. Second, because even if you accepted that there was some sort of chilling effect on their side, like, what is the chilling effect? Like, oh, you might be a witch. No, because as we tell you at first, you pointing out that someone is a witch and being part of that process makes you directly removed from that because you were part of the anti-witch gang, right? You just were not someone who would be a witch because if you were a witch, why would you dob in one of your own? There is no accusation chain. Lastly, let's deal with the material on the devil. They say that, like, the devil accuses you and hates you because you take out the number one soldier. Firstly, the devil hates all of humanity. Why do you care if it hates you as well? Secondly, the devil has no powers. You don't believe that the devil is going to hurt your crops. You believe that the witch is going to do it, right? You don't think the devil is going to eat you. You believe that you should take out the soldiers of the devil. And we can flip this benefit, because if it is true that this is if this is the number one soldier of the devil or whatever, firstly, I don't know why it's the number one soldier. Like, this isn't Santa Claus. There isn't just one of them, right? There are multiple witches who presumably exist, right? Like, if you were to make an analogy, if we really hated Santa Claus, the way that we would beat Santa Claus is to take out the elves so that Santa Claus would not be able to deliver presents everywhere. You're taking out the elves as this villager. Thirdly, you just thought that God protected you, right? Like, God protected you. If the devil hated you, God was the one who was looking over you. God was the one who was going to make sure that you were okay. God was the one who was going to do that. At the end then, also weigh how unresponsive they are to our material, because we give you 4 benefits at Affirmative. Firstly, we tell you that you fulfill the obligation that you and society has placed upon you to report witches, unresponded to. Secondly, we tell you that you ensure your safety. Other people are suspicious of you all the time. You protect implicating yourself. You are able to gain reputation from this, and you're able to protect your family with that stuff. Thirdly, you avoid emotional damage. You avoid dooming your interactions. You avoid seeing yourself as a bad person. You avoid everyone else in your town. Like, you avoid being like bad and sort of tiptoey with everyone else in the town. Unresponded to. We have taken out this negative team, and they have nothing left.
All right, I would like to thank the speaker for his remarks, and I'd like to invite the second speaker for the opposition bench to continue offside and address not exceeding 8 minutes, 15 seconds for each. Here,
These are trying times. You've seen the witch trials go on for decades now, maybe if not, but for a couple of years. You've seen so many people been accused, so many people been killed. No one trusts anyone else now because everyone else suspects everyone is a witch. So when you come out with accusations of a witch, people just don't believe you, especially when you're coming out against the actor who has protected the town, who has the most wealth, someone who people trust in because they have saved them for a while, because they have the powers which have fed people in times of need, because they have the powers to heal people. They've held their child when they were sick, because these are the powers which these witches have held. These are the powers which they seem they can only use for good, so they probably have used them to good to help the town, at least for their very own self-interest. Many questions in this speech. First question on the context of religion, witches, and the devil. The second is on rebuilding our case. Then a couple more questions on what does the obligation look like and what are the benefits you get from accusing. Firstly, on what is the context of religion, devil, and the witches. The first thing to point out is that this is a time after the Protestant Reformation. The Protestants were the one who went to America in this time. So firstly, these are individuals who believed that they were personally connected to God, as opposed to the Catholic religion, which believed that you had to go through people like priests in order to get your own forms of forgiveness. So people could have personal conversations with God about this, suggest that they could find their own forgiveness. They could share this secret with God, which takes down that harm of this emotional turmoil. But it takes down your obligation harm, because you can confide it in with God and say, maybe this is your own problem now, God, but you have told no one else. Suggest that you have fulfilled your obligation because you have told God of the actors of the devil and doesn't need to tell anyone else. But secondly, you're an individual, like this is post the printing press, which means that you have greater access to the Bible. Communities had greater access to the Bible in languages that were more than just Latin. So you knew more about the Bible. You knew about Jesus' tale of forgiveness. You knew about Jesus, not about how Jesus never went directly head on with the devil. And it was all about just resisting the temptation of the devil, never trying to fight anything. Because what God told you and what Jesus told you was never to fight the devil, but rather just to resist what it put forward you. So what that additionally suggests is that you don't feel a lot of the problems that they suggest. You have no obligation to report it, and you won't go to hell because that's not the idea that you face. Then let's look secondly on this kind of point. What does it, in the context and framing, what does the devil look like? Because the devil was simply a creature of temptation. It was a creature that tempted you with lust. It was a creature that tempted you with wealth. So it suggests that it was not ever one that you had and it was one that you always had to fight. This is important because it also feeds into the question about witches. Because Affirmative explained that witches, and what you know as an average reasonable voter, witches are deadly creatures. They sacrifice things. They fornicate with the devil. But the problem is, these witches don't do that. Are they even witches? And that's the doubt that goes through your mind at this moment, is that they do not feel the preconception of setup that Affirmative explained to you, your understanding of this world. So that makes you doubt whether they are witches in the first place. This doubt was impressive, because firstly, it meant that you were uncertain that you were ever going into, you are going against God. That was bad. The point where you were doubting these situations and you didn't know what to do. The best thing to do was not snitch on anyone in these circumstances. So that pieces of context and framing is crucial, because it explains a lot of Affirmative harms just don't work in this debate. Let's look on rebuilding in terms of what we explained. Because what Gautama said, Gautama in terms of our points where we suggest that, yes, there is just an accusation chain. You know this because it probably has occurred before. You want to avoid this risk of it occurring. What does Gautama say? Firstly, they often just can't accuse back. But that doesn't engage with our characterization that this is someone who has social power, who can easily accuse back. But secondly, these are uncertain and untrusting times where anything seems to go, where you've seen the least expected outcomes take place. So it's unclear why they would just firstly trust you in the first place, but secondly why they'd also probably be willing to listen to accusations back. Because they'll say, you're just jealous of their bountiful crops. You're just jealous of their money. You're just jealous of the fact that you're being a doctor, that you're trying to strike down God's great citizens of this town. So it was very easy to accuse back. They suggest that potentially you don't have a first mover advantage. But however, this just didn't make any sense, because there was always a social dynamic. You would accuse and they would be like, no, that is untrue. You actually are jealous for these reasons. You have to do this publicly. There is very easy ways to accuse back. They suggest that, but once you accuse, you can collect evidence. Firstly, the fact that the accusing is done, these witches can just hide this evidence if they ever wanted to. But the second question is, do they even have evidence in their home? This trial has been going on forever. Surely they don't have stuff lying around that's easy to collect in these circumstances. They might say, but you're lazy and you're caught out. But most circumstances, they're aware, they've hidden for long enough, so they are probably successful people. But thirdly, they have time after being accused to clean these things up. They can ask one of their other compatriots to clean it up. So it's unclear whether they can collect evidence. But we flip this harm, because these witches can use their powers to kill the crops of people who doubt you. They can make you look like the bad one. They can grow your crops, so they can grow the weeds in their front yard to make it look like you're casting bad luck on these individuals. Or they can and make it look like then that you are the one, and using their powers to make you look like the bad actor in this scenario. They can do that because they can selectively use that. Suggest that if you are worried about it, and they have the incentive to do this all because they don't want to die. They need to have a shield to play off. Finally, Gautama asks, why would they dob in one of their own in this accusation claim? But the witches, well, obviously these witches don't want to die. They'll do anything in order to deflect this blame. And especially if they aren't dobbing one of their own, it's a false accusation in order to deflect everything, where it suggests that they could occur. So at the end of the day, you should believe that you're likely going to get that this accusation chain will occur. How is this something then that should be valued by you as a citizen? You worry for your own life the most. It's unclear whether you did have an obligation to go after these specific witches because they didn't fill the criteria. But secondly, it's unclear whether you had to necessarily fulfill that obligation, because this trial was set up by the governor of Massachusetts. It was done also by the clergy. It was not done by you as an individual. So you never had the obligation specifically to take this upon yourself. You simply had the obligation to look after yourself under most circumstances. You had the obligation not to give in to the devil. Let's then do some rebutting. Let's talk about the other benefits from the debate. They suggest that firstly, they suggest on personal safety, that people might think you're a witch defender, but you found out. Firstly, it's unclear whether they can ever link you to this. They don't prove this. But secondly, you probably have plausible deniability, because you can explain, I was spying on this witch for ages. I saw something and I wanted to make it for sure to confirm it. Just the fact that you never snitched out immediately because you were uncertain of these circumstances. You can play it smartly in these circumstances. You can wait for someone else to take that move instead. The second push they suggest is that you don't want to go to hell, but it's unclear where you ever think that you are going to go to hell in these circumstances. Because what you would do is that you would confide in God with his secrets, you could find and confess what is going on, and you would be shown forgiveness, because you will know about forgiveness. You were taught as a Protestant about the forgiveness that you would find from God and religion with any action, because you knew that Jesus had died for you and Jesus had provided you with that necessary forgiveness. So you knew you're unlikely to go to hell in these circumstances. They suggest then that you potentially get clout from this, but it's unclear why you would ever get, it's unclear why the community would ever value you. It's unclear because they would, but even if you did get clout, this is clout which was particularly short term, and this was in the sense that firstly you already have a lot of uncertainty weighing over you. It's unclear whether you're able to get this, but secondly, compared to all the other risk, it was just what didn't matter as much. You probably valued about going through your life the most. So it suggests that most of the harms that they get are unimportant, or as my earlier framing explained, were things that didn't matter. Finally, they suggest there's an obligation because you believed in it. Firstly, these are things which you do not believe in your own in your Bible. It's not touted by the Bible, and because it only tells you not to be tempted by the devil. Secondly, it doesn't fit the profile of the witch, so you're unclear if you have an obligation to talk these are witch. But thirdly, the obligation only exists because they provide harm to the town. They don't seem to provide a harm. This is why you're told you should report them. So it's unclear why this obligation exists. But even if other people feel that obligation, proud to negate. Okay? Affirm. I can't remember that. Negate.
All right, I'd like to thank the speaker for his remarks, and I'd like to invite the third speaker for the proposition side to conclude the convention and address on exceeding 8 minutes, 15 seconds grace. Here, here.
I'm going to start this speech by talking about the afterlife, because it's clearly what the actor cares about most. It's clearly their primary interest. That is for 3 reasons. The first is that the afterlife is eternal. It lasts forever, while your life on Earth is very finite, considering life expectancy was not particularly long then. Secondly, your capacity for suffering or salvation in the afterlife is infinite, but your capacity to experience the pleasures of the flesh are quite limited. And thirdly, the interest you have here supersedes that of rationality that negative tries to talk about. This is not a question of cost-benefit analysis. This is not a question of weighing up the facts. This is about a belief system you've been inculcated in from birth, a church you go to every week at best, if not every day, a belief system that is the only thing that explains the things that you see around you, that explains why it is that things occur, that explains how disease operates, that explains why the sun rises and why it sets and how the planets go round. Obviously, this is a thing that you defer to. It is an obligation that supersedes considerations of any of the costs or benefits that this team talks about. It's an obligation that is the first thing you think of, which is why it is the most important in the debate. What does side negative tell you as to why you should not immediately follow the very obvious obligation you would feel to combat the devil, to avoid the sin of cowardice, and to fight the most evil being that exists when it comes to your town and confronts you? They say God would forgive you, so why would you bother doing this? But firstly, you feel that you have an obligation to confront the devil. The fact that maybe there's a loophole in the Bible and you can get away with not doing something is not the way that this person is likely to think about it. But secondly, this is not the God that this actor thinks about. This is the God of the Crusades. This is the God of the Inquisitions. This is a God that believes in fire and brimstone, not a God who you might hear about at a Unitarian church in 2024. It's a very different God and a very different form of theology. But secondly, you're very likely to believe, for example, that you're being tested and that God is checking to see how you behave when you are confronted with evil. Do you turn the other cheek and say, it's someone else's problem, I can get into heaven anyway, I will not deal with it? Or is this the instance where you feel you finally take up your burden and show God that you are worthy and that your soul is pure? But secondly, they say maybe you think it's an angel and not a witch, and therefore you wouldn't want to do anything bad. Firstly, the info slide suggests that you think it is a witch. Either we can trust the info slide and you know for certain it's a witch, which they rely on when they tell you you know that the witches only do good things, or it's the case that we cannot trust the info slide and maybe the info slide describes what the actor believes but not necessarily what the actor sees but not necessarily what the actor believes. If that was the case, this is devastating for this team because that means you're far more likely to believe that the actor is a witch because you don't know that the witch isn't also doing bad things. You just see some good of things, you immediately default to the assumption that it must be a witch, because that is the kind of common knowledge that you know of. The Malleus Maleficarum that Annika tells you about was the best-selling book at this period of time. It was cultural knowledge. It was the kind of thing that was shared through churches, through gossip. Meanwhile, talk of like angels setting up farming communes nearby you is absolutely ludicrous. That's not how God intervenes in the world. It would make no sense for that to be your assumption. Particularly in a context where you're in the middle of the Salem witch trials, is your imagination going to go to witch, or is it going to go to thing that has never happened before and obviously just would never happen? Thirdly, they say the Bible says to forgive. One, this is actually just not true, right? Like, the Bible doesn't say that crimes shouldn't be punished. It, in fact, says a whole bunch of crimes should be punished in a whole bunch of very specific ways. Secondly, it says maybe you should forgive other humans. Definitely doesn't say forgive the devil or forgive witches. But thirdly, it seems very clear that in this instance, your obligation would not be to forgive the witches. And that would be something that maybe God could do, but you obviously would not. The impact of this is you obviously believe there is an obligation to do this. You believe that your chance to get into heaven is on the line, that your soul will burn in hell forever if you do not act, if you let your cowardice get the best of you, if you choose the easy path, if you do not do what is righteous and what is necessary, you will burn in hell forever. Your family will be doomed. That is exactly why you would never side with negative. Second issue, though, let's move on to that of safety, because clearly, as both teams agree, the Salem witch trials burnt through these communities with accusation after accusation flying, often in very large chains, and that is exactly why it is the case that you ought act now against these witches. They give you a couple of reasons why you shouldn't. Firstly, they say you can't prove they're witches. Firstly, the info slide says you have pretty good proof they're witches because you saw all these things. Why couldn't you just show other people those things? Secondly, witches tend to have things like totems and other objects around them because they require them to commune with the devil, to make sacrifices, and to, have hot sex with the devil, which suggests that for all those reasons, those objects would be things that they can't just get rid of or hide, particularly because you've seen evidence of them doing witchcraft, so clearly they have the necessary ingredients and potions and tinctures to engage in that witchcraft. But thirdly, you could just trap them. Like, maybe you pretend to be injured and ask for help, and then they do witchcraft in front of someone. Like, you have someone hiding in the bushes, and then they seize them, and, Spanish Inquisition, no one expects it. Secondly, they say the witches will counter-accuse you. Firstly, you have a first mover advantage. It's really sus to just be like, no, you're the witch. Like, no one believes that. It's obviously a lie that you say in order to get out of getting in trouble. Secondly, you could accuse them secretly, like you go to the clergy. The clergy will then investigate. The clergy can look for evidence. They're obviously very clever about this because the Malleus Maleficarum actually spells out how you're meant to conduct these witch trials, how to look for evidence, how to avoid being spotted by the witches. Like, this is common knowledge. The Inquisition had rules, it had techniques. Obviously, they thought of the idea that the witches would counter-accuse. They thought of the idea that the witches would be sneaky. Obviously, theologians did spend a fair amount of time thinking about how to conduct these things. Thirdly, they had tools in order to find out if someone was a witch. Things like, you could dunk them in water, and if they, if they drown, they're innocent, and if they float, they're not, etc. Since most of these things would probably just kill them, whether they're innocent or not, they obviously would not have a chance to then counter-accuse you, because the only way to exonerate themselves would be to engage in a process that would necessarily kill them, so you'd be safe in that instance. They say these people would have clout. It's unclear why. Like, witches aren't known for being, particularly popular or people getting along with them. They tend to be kind of the weird units who sit on the outside of town. But even if it's the case, it wasn't uncommon for people who, were the object of jealousy to be accused of things like crimes. Like, just look at the history of anti-Semitism to see how it's very easy to stir up animus against people who tend to be richer, more successful, or more popular within these communities. And notably, we say the only real way to be safe is not to be clouty or rich, it's actually just to be at the head of the mob. Like, if the mob is a threat, you want to be in front of the mob, not behind the mob. Or, sorry, you want to be like in the mob, not outside the mob. And that's what you do on our side. As soon as you accuse someone, everyone's like, well, this guy can't be a witch because he's actively trying to solve the problem. It's everyone who is like kind of being shifty and silent who's suspicious, which is why accusing anyone immediately is very good for you. But we explain this is the best person to accuse because you can do so guilt-free. You don't need to worry about going to hell for like wrongfully accusing someone. And they say if this person comes after you, like, one, it seems just like this is not really a big threat. We explain you'd very likely be able to kill them. But the real risks that they don't countenance are the fact that, like, what if someone knows that you saw the witches and you do nothing? They say, oh, I was conducting an investigation. No one believes that. Your obligation is to immediately alert the authorities and let them conduct the investigation. What if you leak that information, which we say is extremely likely for a number of reasons, like the fact that everyone was drinking beer all the time because the water was unsanitary, like the fact that these are tight-knit communities where you discuss everything. It'd be very obvious that you're, like, being weird and shifty, that your partner's like, why aren't you sharing things with me? All the psychic harm that's likely to impart. So if you cared about your friends and you cared about your family, you would of course immediately report the witch, particularly because anytime something bad happened in your community, you would assume the witch is responsible. You would assume it is on you that that person has died. It is on you that the crops have failed. It is your fault for not reporting them in time. So not only do you feel like you're going to hell, you feel like the community is suffering for your sins. Vote to affirm.
I'd like to thank the speaker for their remarks, and I'd like to invite the third speaker for the opposition side to conclude this round as a whole and to address not exceeding 8 minutes, 15 seconds grace. Here.
Two things I'll be discussing in this speech. First of all, how will you now be viewed in God's eyes? And second of all, about your personal safety and preservation in this world of Salem. Firstly, on the matter of whether or not God will forgive you. I will note this is where most of the material that comes from side affirmative lies because of how high the stakes of the afterlife are. So if we are able to deal with this issue, we go a long way in winning this debate. What do they tell you? Firstly, they tell you that, they tell you that, they tell you late in their case that you don't forgive the devil, you forgive the people. And a lot of these times, these people weren't that educated on forgiveness, but knew how to expel these devils. And that's why this was something that had a pretty high imperative. A few responses. Firstly, I would note that witches are still people that have been corrupted by the devil, in the same way that a person that committed adultery or committed theft had been corrupted by the devil to do a really bad thing. So in that way, they are still a person that has made a grave sin by corroborating with the devil in that sense. But second of all, we all know empirically these people are Puritans because they split from the Protestants, and Puritans was a religion that emphasized forgiveness, that emphasized the redemption of the spirit. It is why it was so popular in America at that time, because God was such a powerful figure who had an unlimited capacity to forgive you. But thirdly, even if I think that not dealing with this isn't necessarily an admission of cowardice, but rather it's an admission and an understanding that God is the only one that can see what is right in this circumstance. Maybe this is something that I am too feeble to fight. Maybe this battle is not for me, and it is for God to partake in it. And just the mere fact of not engaging with this is a submission of God's might and his power. So that in a way is a way in which you still submit to your belief. Secondly, they tell you that it helps your stance with God, and it also increases your social status within the village. A couple of responses. Firstly, I think that now you are the focus of the town. And I would posit, especially since you don't know whether you're a man or a woman in this motion, any increase in attention in this debate is still something that is deadly. Even if you are the center of the town, maybe you are at the head or in the mob or whatever, any increase in attention is deadly because people had a high amount of scrutiny at the time. You're subject to more scrutiny, you're subject to more attention, and you invited claims, or people, you are far more likely to be the case where people confirm their biases of you being a witch, especially if there are counter accusations against you. But thirdly, I would say that cowardice is not a sin in the Bible. Like it's just not, it's just flat out not a sin. A lot of the times the things that are sins in the Bible are things that are easy to understand. They are actions more often than they are inactions in the Bible, because that is something that is clear to communicate, and structurally that is easy for the Bible to communicate towards the people. And that is why we think that God, like you will still be in God's good graces at this time. Like God is a very forgiving individual. To submit to cowardice in this situation is just an admission that God understands what is best, that God is all-knowing, he is all-powerful in this debate. But more crucially, I'm going to do the way up. Even if you believe their claims, and even if you believe Udai's pushes towards the end, let's take it at their absolute best. Say maybe in this particular instant in your life, you are not in God's good graces. Why is it still fine in the end? Because firstly, we already noted the notion of forgiveness. But secondly, the notion of redemption. That is, your moral ledger isn't confined to this moment. You have so many other moments in your life. Instead of taking this one fuck up that could change your life forever, you can still counterweigh by doing so many more good things. And if anything, that moment could be a chance where you can redeem yourself, where if you are still scared, you can always choose to redeem yourself in God's eyes. You can join, you can become a missionary. It is always something you can weigh up. It is not worth risking your life over this one decision. But thirdly, I just don't think it is that high impact, because there are so many choices that comprise of the entirety of your life. One wrong choice is not the difference between you and hell, because this isn't something that is one of the very clearly listed unforgivable sins. So you are still fine, and God has made it very clear that he can forgive you. So even if you did believe it, we just don't think it is that high importance. So that is why, even if, what do you know at the end of that? You know that God is likely to be fine with you in that situation. Submitting that this situation may be out of your knowledge because you don't know a lot at that time is a completely fine admission, and is not something that is going to harm you. At the very worst, you have so much potential, so much capacity to better yourself later in your life. On the more important issue on self-preservation, which we think we wash, what do they tell you? First of all, they tell you that people won't believe the counter accusations that person makes you. Firstly, on the thing of social status, we already gave you many structural reasons as to why, these people are likely to have high social status. They can grow crops, they can treat ailments, and because gossip in these towns, you had nothing to do in Salem, since gossip was a very good means of very highly used means of gaining and transacting information. That means your social status becomes even more important in those situations. So that is something you should consider. But secondly, obviously bleeding into it, gossip. People love a good story, especially in these times. It is why these stories drive such a fervor and got such attention. But thirdly, you could also believe, maybe Udai tries to make a mockery of it with Angel with productivity farms, but I think that it's very common for people to believe that God has blessed them. You believe that after you've done a lot of good deeds in your lifetime, maybe God does bless you. And that's why you try to do good things, because maybe God will end those hard times for your family. Maybe God will make these times financially easier for you to bear. So blessings are things that people obviously believe in. It's one of the main incentives that draws people, that makes them flock to religion. But fourthly, people are always speculative in these situations. There is so much fear-mongering going around that people are speculative. And the trade-off is, under our side of the house, there is a 0.1% that you get found out if you don't say anything. There is a 25, at best case, or 50% chance you get found out, because at social house, if you do choose to snitch, it is just not the safe choice. But secondly, they tell you that people will find out if you don't snitch. I think this is very easy to beat. Firstly, this premises on other people finding out whether or not you saw this in the first place. And I think that is unlikely for a number of reasons. Firstly, I think, first of all, this has gone on for many years, so not that many people have suspected them in the first place. It's unlikely that they will in the future. But secondly, people obviously buy into the good forces narrative because blessings is a very compelling part of religion that people are drawn to. But thirdly, even if they find out, they wouldn't suss you. And there's a couple of reasons. Firstly, it's very understandable. If it took them 20 years to find this out, they won't blame you or they won't blame 5 people if they haven't seen this immediately. But second of all, I would note that these things aren't that immediately visible. Like a plant takes time to grow. Even if the difference between 5 days and like 25 days is something that you notice, it's not something that a whole lot of people notice. Maybe you are an especially perceptive person. That's why you're in this situation. And thirdly, you have they have other more pressing concerns. They don't need to worry about witches linked to other witches when they have other big main accusations ongoing on forward. At the end of that, what do you know? Self-preservation is incredibly important in this debate because one mess up could end your life. And when you have so much more good to do in your life, when you can earn so much more good in your life towards the future, you need to preserve your life into the future so you can have good blessings. For all of those reasons, very proud to negate. Thank you.
All right, I would like to thank that speaker for his remarks and everyone who was an excellent round of debate. I invite everyone to cross the floor and shake hands. Before everyone leaves, please make sure to consent or not consent into the recording. And the panel will now go deliberate publicly upstairs. Yeah, let's go upstairs.